Your soulmate just wrote you a secret love letter. It disappears in 5 minutes. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because your soulmate recently experienced something they never expected. Not a dramatic event. Not a shocking revelation. Not a life-changing announcement. Something quieter. Something deeply personal. Something that began with a single thought they could not seem to escape. And listen to this. The day had been ordinary. The kind of day that passes without much attention. Responsibilities filled the hours. Tasks demanded focus. Conversations came and went. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed significant. Nothing suggested that before the night was over, they would find themselves staring at a blank page, trying to put impossible feelings into words. Yet that's exactly what happened. Because your heart needs this right now, because some of the most important moments begin on the most ordinary days. Your soulmate was about to experience one of those moments. And listen to this. As evening arrived, the noise of the day slowly faded. The obligations ended. The distractions disappeared. The world became quieter. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. A memory returned. Not a dramatic memory. Not a painful memory. A simple memory. A moment that seemed insignificant when it happened. Yet somehow it had survived. It remained. Long after countless other memories had faded away. And that realization made them pause. Why had that memory stayed? Why had it survived while so many others disappeared? Why did it still carry meaning? Because your heart needs this right now, because the memories that remain often reveal what truly touched us. Your soulmate was beginning to understand that. And listen to this. One memory became several. Several became many. Before long, they found themselves reflecting on experiences they hadn't thought about in years. Conversations. Moments. Lessons. Unexpected encounters. Tiny pieces of life that somehow continued living inside their heart. The strange thing was that none of those moments seemed extraordinary at the time. Yet looking back, they suddenly felt important. Almost as if life had hidden little messages inside them. Messages that could only be understood later. Because your heart needs this right now, because some lessons reveal their meaning only after enough time has passed. Your soulmate was finally seeing those lessons clearly. And listen to this. The more they reflected, the more emotional they became. Not because they were sad. Not because they were overwhelmed. Because they were grateful. Grateful for the journey. Grateful for the growth. Grateful for the way life had shaped them. For years, they focused on destinations. Goals. Achievements. Milestones. Always looking ahead. Always chasing the next chapter. Yet now they found themselves appreciating chapters they once rushed through. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom often arrives when we stop rushing and start noticing. Your soulmate was finally noticing. And listen to this. As the night grew darker, another realization appeared. A realization that changed everything. They understood that certain feelings never truly disappear. They evolve. They transform. They become part of us. They influence the way we see the world. The way we see ourselves. The way we understand our journey. And suddenly they realized why the blank page in front of them felt so important. The page wasn't asking for perfect words. It was asking for honesty. Because your heart needs this right now, because honesty often begins where explanations end. Your soulmate was finally being honest. And listen to this. At first, they only intended to write a few sentences. Just enough to organize their thoughts. Just enough to understand what they were feeling. Nothing more. Yet something unexpected happened. The words kept coming. One sentence led to another. One thought uncovered another. One memory revealed another lesson. And before they realized it, the page was filling itself. Not with perfection. With truth. Because truth has a way of finding its own voice when we stop trying to control it. Your soulmate had stopped trying to control it. And listen to this. The first thing they wrote was surprisingly simple. They wrote about change. About how life changes us. About how experiences shape us. About how people often underestimate how much growth can happen quietly. Without announcements. Without recognition. Without anyone noticing. They realized they weren't the same person they used to be. Not because life had become easier. Because life had taught them things. Because your heart needs this right now, because growth is often invisible while it's happening. Your soulmate could finally see their growth. And listen to this. The letter continued. Paragraph after paragraph. Memory after memory. Lesson after lesson. The more they wrote, the more they understood. The more they understood, the lighter they felt. The more honest they became, the less they needed to pretend. For the first time in a very long while, they weren't hiding from themselves. And that felt freeing. Incredibly freeing. Because your heart needs this right now, because freedom often begins the moment we stop denying what we feel. Your soulmate was experiencing that freedom. And listen to this. At one point, they stopped writing and simply stared at the page. Not because they were finished. Because they were surprised. Surprised by how much had been waiting inside them. Surprised by how many lessons they had never fully appreciated. Surprised by how many truths had been quietly growing beneath the surface. It felt as though the letter had been writing itself for years. Waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. Because your heart needs this right now, because some truths require time before they're ready to be spoken. Your soulmate had finally reached that time. And listen to this. The deeper they went, the more they realized something important. The letter wasn't really about the past. It wasn't about memories. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about understanding. Understanding how every chapter contributed something valuable. Understanding how every lesson shaped them. understanding how every experience helped create the person they had become. And that understanding brought peace. Real peace. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding transforms confusion into gratitude. Your soulmate was discovering gratitude. And listen to this. As midnight approached, the letter continued growing. The words felt genuine. The reflections felt meaningful. The honesty felt necessary. For the first time in a long while, they weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't trying to create something perfect. They were simply telling the truth. And that truth felt more powerful than perfection ever could. Because your heart needs this right now, because authenticity connects more deeply than perfection. Your soulmate had finally embraced authenticity. And listen to this. Before ending the first section of the letter, they paused one final time. They looked back at everything they had written. The memories. The lessons. The reflections. The gratitude. And one thought settled deeply into their heart. Maybe the things that stay with us aren't meant to hold us back. Maybe they're meant to teach us something. Maybe they're meant to remind us how much we've grown. And with that realization, they continued writing. Because the letter wasn't finished. Not even close. There was still more truth waiting to be revealed. More lessons waiting to be understood. More honesty waiting to find its voice. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after writing the first pages of the letter, your soulmate reached a part they never expected to write. The part they almost skipped. The part they almost erased. The part that felt too personal. Too honest. Too real. And listen to this. For a long time, they believed certain feelings belonged in silence. Not because those feelings were wrong. Because they were difficult to explain. How do you explain a memory that stayed when thousands of others disappeared? How do you explain why certain moments continue echoing through the years? How do you explain the strange way some experiences refuse to leave your heart? Your soulmate didn't have easy answers. Yet the more they stared at the page, the more they realized something. The letter deserved honesty. Because your heart needs this right now, because truth loses its power when we keep editing it. Your soulmate stopped editing. And listen to this. The next paragraph began with a confession. Not a dramatic confession. Not a shocking confession. A simple one. They admitted that some moments had affected them more deeply than they ever allowed themselves to admit. Moments they once dismissed. Moments they once minimized. Moments they told themselves were unimportant. Yet despite all their efforts, those moments remained. Waiting. Quietly. Patiently. Refusing to disappear. And that realization felt impossible to ignore. Because your heart needs this right now, because the things that stay often stay for a reason. Your soulmate was finally asking why. And listen to this. As they continued writing, another memory appeared. Then another. Then another. Not because they were searching for them. Because the act of honesty was opening doors inside their heart. Doors that had remained closed for years. Behind those doors were lessons. Experiences. Emotions. Pieces of themselves they rarely examined. And suddenly they realized something surprising. The letter wasn't just revealing memories. It was revealing growth. Because your heart needs this right now, because looking backward sometimes helps us see how far we've come. Your soulmate was finally seeing the distance they had traveled. And listen to this. One section of the letter became especially emotional. Not because of sadness. Because of gratitude. For years, they viewed certain chapters of life as obstacles. Roadblocks. Detours. Unnecessary complications. Yet now they could see something different. Those chapters had taught resilience. Patience. Understanding. Compassion. Without those experiences, they would not be the same person today. And suddenly the things they once resisted became things they appreciated. Because your heart needs this right now, because perspective has the power to transform old frustrations into wisdom. Your soulmate was experiencing that transformation. And listen to this. The deeper they wrote, the more another truth emerged. For so long, they focused on outcomes. What happened? What didn't happen? What succeeded? What failed? Yet now they understood that the most important part wasn't the outcome. It was the lesson. The growth. The understanding. The person they became along the way. That realization changed everything. Because your heart needs this right now, because growth often matters more than the destination. Your soulmate was finally recognizing that. And listen to this. At one point, they stopped writing and simply stared out the window. The night was quiet. The world felt distant. The page sat open before them. And a question appeared. Why am I writing all of this now? The answer arrived almost immediately. Because they were finally ready. Ready to stop pretending certain experiences didn't matter. Ready to stop minimizing lessons that changed them. Ready to stop hiding from truths they had already known for years. Because your heart needs this right now, because readiness cannot be forced. It arrives when the heart decides it is time. Your soulmate had reached that moment. And listen to this. The next section of the letter felt different. More vulnerable. More personal. More honest than anything they had written before. Not because they were trying to impress anyone. Because they were trying to understand themselves. The words became less about events and more about meaning. Less about memories and more about lessons. Less about the past and more about what the past had taught them. And suddenly the letter became something far greater than a collection of thoughts. It became a reflection. A reflection of growth. A reflection of understanding. A reflection of everything life had quietly been teaching them. Because your heart needs this right now, because reflection often reveals truths hidden beneath everyday life. Your soulmate was uncovering those truths. And listen to this. The most surprising realization came near the end of the chapter. A realization they never expected. They understood that every meaningful experience leaves a mark. Not a wound. Not a burden. A mark. A lesson. A reminder. A piece of wisdom carried forward into the future. And once they saw life that way, everything felt different. The difficult moments felt valuable. The confusing moments felt educational. The uncertain moments felt necessary. Because your heart needs this right now, because every chapter contributes something to who we become. Your soulmate finally understood that. And listen to this. As midnight grew closer, they reread everything they had written. The confessions. The memories. The gratitude. The lessons. Every paragraph carried a truth. Every sentence carried meaning. Every word felt genuine. And for the first time in a very long while, they felt completely honest with themselves. That honesty brought peace. A deep peace. The kind of peace that appears when we stop fighting our own story and start appreciating it. Because your heart needs this right now, because acceptance often creates the peace we've been searching for. Your soulmate was finally finding that peace. And before turning the page and continuing the letter, one final thought settled into their heart. Maybe the memories that stayed weren't meant to trap me in the past. Maybe they were meant to remind me of everything I learned. Maybe they remained because they still had something to teach me. And with that realization, they continued writing. Because there was still one truth left to reveal. One truth they never expected to place into words. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because as your soulmate continued writing, they reached a paragraph that made them stop completely. And listen to this. For several minutes, they stared at the words on the page. Not because they were wrong. Because they were true. The truth was simple. Some experiences change us forever. Some lessons stay with us long after the moment has passed. Some memories continue teaching us things years later. Your soulmate almost deleted those words. Not because they didn't believe them. Because honesty can feel vulnerable. Because your heart needs this right now, because the deepest truths are often the hardest to admit. Yet the more they thought about it, the more they realized something important. The letter wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real. So instead of deleting the paragraph, they kept writing. They wrote about growth. About gratitude. About how every challenge had taught them something valuable. And by the time they finished, they felt lighter. Calmer. Freer. Because they finally stopped hiding from what they had learned. And as they looked at the page, one final thought stayed with them. The moments that mattered most weren't always the biggest moments. They were the moments that changed who I became. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after everything your soulmate had written, after every memory, every lesson, every reflection, and every moment of honesty, they finally arrived at the final page of the letter. The page they had been avoiding. The page they weren't sure they could write. The page that contained the most important truth of all. And listen to this. For several minutes, they simply stared at the blank space waiting beneath the final paragraph. The room was silent. The night felt still. The letter was almost complete. Yet something remained unfinished. Something important. Something that had quietly followed them through every chapter of the letter. Because your heart needs this right now, because the deepest truths often wait until the very end before revealing themselves. Your soulmate was approaching one of those truths. And listen to this. They looked back at everything they had written. The memories that refused to disappear. The lessons hidden inside difficult moments. The gratitude they had discovered. The growth they had overlooked for years. Everything pointed toward a single realization. A realization so simple it almost felt unbelievable. Yet the more they thought about it, the more certain they became. The realization was this. Every experience had changed them. Not just the major moments. Not just the dramatic moments. Every moment. Every lesson. Every challenge. Every unexpected turn. Life had been shaping them the entire time. Because your heart needs this right now, because growth is often happening long before we recognize it. Your soulmate finally recognized it. And listen to this. For years, they believed they needed answers. They believed they needed certainty. They believed they needed to understand exactly where every road would lead before taking the next step. Yet now they understood something completely different. The most important parts of life are rarely understood in advance. They're understood in reflection. In hindsight. In the quiet moments when we finally pause long enough to appreciate what we've learned. And suddenly the entire letter made sense. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding often arrives when we stop demanding immediate explanations. Your soulmate had stopped demanding them. And listen to this. The final section of the letter wasn't about the past. It wasn't about specific memories. It wasn't about regrets. It wasn't about unanswered questions. It was about appreciation. Deep appreciation. Appreciation for lessons. Appreciation for growth. Appreciation for every chapter that contributed something meaningful. Even the chapters they once struggled to understand. Especially those chapters. Because your heart needs this right now, because gratitude transforms old burdens into wisdom. Your soulmate had discovered that transformation. And listen to this. As they continued writing, another realization appeared. One that brought an unexpected smile to their face. They realized that life had never required perfection from them. Only participation. Only effort. Only growth. Only the willingness to keep learning. For years, they had been far harder on themselves than life ever was. For years, they measured themselves against impossible standards. For years, they focused more on mistakes than lessons. Yet now they could finally see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture was beautiful. Because your heart needs this right now, because self-understanding often creates the compassion we've been denying ourselves. Your soulmate was finally becoming compassionate toward their own journey. And listen to this. The final paragraphs came easier than expected. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The need for perfect words had disappeared. Only honesty remained. And honesty felt enough. More than enough. Every sentence carried clarity. Every paragraph carried peace. Every word carried acceptance. The kind of acceptance that arrives when someone finally stops fighting their own story. Because your heart needs this right now, because peace begins where resistance ends. Your soulmate had finally reached that peace. And listen to this. Then came the final secret hidden inside the letter. The secret they never expected to discover while writing. The secret that changed everything. It wasn't about another person. It wasn't about a mystery. It wasn't about something hidden in the future. The secret was about themselves. They discovered that they were stronger than they realized. Wiser than they realized. More resilient than they realized. They discovered that every difficult chapter had prepared them for future chapters. Every lesson had expanded their understanding. Every challenge had revealed hidden strength. And suddenly they understood something remarkable. They had been growing all along. Even during moments when they felt lost. Because your heart needs this right now, because growth does not stop simply because we fail to notice it. Your soulmate had been growing every day. And listen to this. As the letter approached its final lines, they felt an overwhelming sense of calm. Not because life was perfect. Not because uncertainty had disappeared. Not because every question had an answer. Because they finally trusted themselves. Trusted their journey. Trusted their lessons. Trusted their ability to keep learning no matter what happened next. That trust changed everything. Because your heart needs this right now, because self-trust creates a kind of peace that external circumstances cannot provide. Your soulmate had discovered that peace. And listen to this. The last words of the letter were not dramatic. They were not complicated. They were not grand declarations. They were simple. Yet powerful. They wrote, "I finally understand. I understand that every chapter mattered. I understand that every lesson had value. I understand that growth often happens quietly. I understand that life was teaching me all along. And most importantly, I understand that I don't need to have every answer to appreciate the journey." Those words sat quietly on the page. Simple words. Honest words. True words. And for several moments, they simply stared at them. Because your heart needs this right now, because sometimes the simplest truths take the longest to discover. Your soulmate had finally discovered theirs. And listen to this. The letter was complete. The journey through its pages had come to an end. The memories had been honored. The lessons had been acknowledged. The growth had been recognized. The truth had been spoken. There was nothing left to add. Nothing left to hide. Nothing left to explain. Only gratitude remained. And as they carefully put down the pen, one final thought stayed with them. Maybe the purpose of this letter was never to explain the past. Maybe it was to help me understand it. Maybe the greatest gift wasn't writing these words. Maybe it was discovering the person those words revealed. And with that realization, the letter quietly ended.